words, even on a page, can have a huge effect when the conditions are favourable. The Gospel that we have just read makes me remember an experience I had at the age of 13, whenever that would have been, during a moment of homework in history. The history book was going through the period of the Middle Ages in which the mendicant orders were born. And at one point, in giving the account of what happened to Francis of Assisi, there was a pause in which it put in print in the middle of the page these words that we have just read. If you will be perfect, go, sell all that you have, and give to the poor, and you have treasure in heaven, then come, follow me. I remember putting down the book and climbing down the ladder of the bunk on which I was lying while reading this, and kneeling at my brother's bunk at the bottom and saying to the Lord, okay, in whatever words that came. But it was a saying yes. That verse I felt must be for me, and I heard it as St. Francis had heard it. And even though still an evangelical at the time, because it was the Lord's word, and because Francis of Assisi was an evangelical before the time, and respected also by them, it was not therefore inconsistent. Indeed, with my mother around that time, I found myself at his tomb in Assisi, and Mam said to me calmly in Welsh, just as the Poverello would have wanted it, simple. So when it came then to living out this initial idea that there must be a way of perfection, it was logical that that should lead to more reading of history and of the things of the Lord, which logically is bound to place you in the ambit of not just your own tradition. The Catholic Church cannot be avoided. However, there were problems with that issue, and I think you know what they would be for an evangelical. I'm not going to go into that now. I want to make a big jump straight away. When it came to the coming into the Catholic Church under age, the question posed itself then with regard to how to carry on that sequence of events. And hardly in the Catholic Church, actually I don't think I was officially yet at that point, I started writing to the Franciscans, actually the Capuchins, partly because en route I'd looked very carefully at the figure of Padre Pio, who had been alive up until that time. And I remember thinking to myself, if one can be a saint like him in an order like that, then surely that is a safe way to perfection. Now, one would think that logically that would be sufficient to make things happen without any problem. But something actually unexpectedly came in at that point, and I just share it to make you aware of how the responsibility of anyone in a situation of discernment and accompanying vocations is capitally important. Because in practice, although a letter came back from a local priory in Wales immediately with actually a book which was very enticing and interesting and very inspiring, a letter from the actual Director of Vocations was a very long time in coming back. And in the process, because I was keen on going straight from school to a novitiate, I refused all possibility of going to university, including any possibility of going to Oxford and Cambridge like all my friends and my brother. So all that was lost because no letter was coming back from the vocations director. I don't want to point a finger at this particular one, but it's just to remind people out there that these things are extremely important. And anything which is divine has to be accompanied by a human being who is able to pick that up. One doesn't fabricate or program vocations, one listens to what the Spirit himself has already started to do. It can't be done. One can't program vocations. They don't come like that. So basically, when eventually I had an encounter with him, straight away there was this reaction of, you're too young, and all that went with it. Which would explain how, when suddenly, out of the blue, in the convent where I used to serve Mass in the morning near our house, when one of the sisters said, there's a monk here who's just had an operation and he's in convalescence, and we would like you to befriend him and take him for walks in the nearby park for him to get better quietly. So I got to know this monk dressed in white, not like the monks in black in our parish run by Benedictines of Ampleforth and Buckfast, but in this contemplative mode, the Benedictines of Prynich, which were descended from the converts of Caldy. They started as Anglicans. And he, therefore, while we were walking in the park day after day, would tell me things. And I would also serve his Mass at the altar when he was well enough to celebrate. And he served, I liked serving him because he celebrated very well. He was a contemplative, and that could be felt. And so, naturally, I started to think, well, maybe he'd take me in. And I started to talk about that. And he said, well, look, we all start at 18, but now they tend to send them away, but we know that actually if we do, they don't come back. So he was in a quandary. Eventually, I got to the abbey and was there hoping to enter, and the abbot called me in, and he was there and he was on the other side, and they said, your parents want you to go to university, you've got to listen to them, you can come here for the holidays if you want. But at least they took me seriously, and from the beginning that was important, and I knew that that was going to be an important thing should there ever be a question of actually entering a family. You've got to be taken care of as though you're the only person in the world. You're not a number. These things matter an awful lot. And by the way, just to bring in something linked with that, years later, when after it hadn't worked out in France, where I eventually went to enter, out of the blue, without my writing or saying anything to anyone, this letter came from the abbot of Prynich, who had heard about what had happened and wanted to see me. I thought, if that's not paternal care, what is? So he said, okay, go back for a while to your studies and we'll think about it. And obviously he was going to let me back in if I wanted to into there. I'm not going to go into all the details, but when eventually I was ordained, it was actually in a French community again, but in Italy. I was sent back for the first Masses around here, actually involved with some of you, and there it all happened. But the first place I celebrated at when getting back to Britain was actually Prynich. And who served it but that same novice master who was then in his 90s somewhere and still a holy man. And he said to me after we got back from the altar, it was Latin Mass in the private chapel at the Abbey, he said to me words which I've never forgotten, which I'll try always to remember until I die. Just one sentence. Never lose your fervour. And that happens. The freshness of the encounter can be lost. But that word has always been a warning ringing in the air. It has to be always the freshness of the first celebration. Never get used to the explosion of the arrival of God on earth. Which is, by the way, surrounded by many things. Just the other day, I had with me for her annual quiet time and retreat in the cool of Ireland, a hermit from Italy where the temperature is in the 40s, and she comes gladly to get something bearable and also refreshing, because she's a great brain and she knows things and likes to have someone to talk to about things on that level. But she's also very well informed and a great source of information. And this came out of the conversation at one point. Those little angels that you have in the chapel, you may not be aware, but they have been responsible for a whole avenue of research for me into angelology. And she had got big time into this whole subject of what angels were about, what their choirs were, what the traditions of the church were, east and west, and scripture. And she was able to tell me all kinds of things I wasn't aware of. For instance, in the period when the church was not divided, there were more archangels venerated. There were actually 7. When eventually the West reduced things officially from on high to 3 named archangels, the other, which still in the East have names, the other group, like Uriel and Shealtiel and these others, just were eclipsed, but not so in the East. And what they do, of course, they do liturgically. That's where things remain fossilized forever. Therefore, they're there from an early stage. And by chance, because she wanted to visit Christchurch, because of interest in history, we visited the Anglican Cathedral, which is, of course, Catholic in origin, but there are links in spirituality between the Anglican Church and the Orthodox Church in some elements. For instance, iconography, that's come big time into vogue now. And if you go to Christchurch, you will find the angels there. Recent icons, very beautiful icons, on the right as you go towards the Lady Chapel and the high altar, but it's on the right there, a nice area of prayer. Look carefully and you'll find how many icons of angels? 7. Read carefully and you can guess, if you can decipher slightly the Greek, oh yes, they're exactly those names, the ones honoured in the East from the earliest times. And she went on quite a lot about the importance of angels, their roles and divisions and so on. But then she went into other things about the bad angels. How actually there's more going on with regard to demonic activity in depth than we know or imagine. She told me things that I cannot repeat because she didn't want me to, but she knew things about the degree and manner of infiltration of the Catholic Church, of the Vatican itself, with regard to those working for the wrong side, Freemasonry, and how the thing is perfectly orchestrated by the most intelligent angelic being of all, who is obeyed perfectly by the choirs in reverse, who work precisely because they're in unison, whereas we're completely divided amongst ourselves. Divide and conquer. It's always worked, and it's working perfectly now. Which brings me to where I want to land. We don't play that game when we're, for instance, in holy talk. Much holy talk is precisely nourishing that game of dividing and conquering. Bad talk about our local priest, our local bishop, our local, whatever it might be, up to the top. It's not the best way to use one's vocal cords. It's better to be uplifting, balanced, not to close one's eyes, but to be aware that there are people who need our help in prayer, but that the real problem is far deeper. We're seeing the tip of the iceberg. I conclude. For our part, we have only possibility over one small area of the planet, actually what's within the envelope of our body. What we do with our faculties, with our mind, and with what we are actually performing where we are. All the rest, we can only influence directly or indirectly, but we can only waste energy if we try to make noises about it. Use your energy well. Limit it where it's channeled. Don't waste it playing precisely the enemy's game. I conclude. The angels are extremely real. Alone in an empty chapel, one can sometimes almost feel their wings. They love silence. The devil is a noisy specimen at best and can't bear the sacred sound of stillness.